In the small university town of Moscow, Idaho, life flowed calmly and steadily. The city, with a population of about 25,000 people, where the main institution is the University of Idaho, rarely appeared in national news. But the events of the night of November 13, 2022, forever changed this quiet corner of America and shocked the entire country with their brutality and incomprehensibility. At the house at 1122 King Road, located near the university campus, a tragedy occurred that would later be called one of the most horrific crimes in the state's history. For University of Idaho students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were brutally murdered in their own home. 3 of the girls lived in this 3-story house, and Ethan was visiting his girlfriend Xana. According to the investigation, the murders took place between 4 o'clock and 4:25 a.m. Police later determined that the attacker entered the house through the rear glass door. All victims were killed with a fixed-blade knife, suffering numerous stab wounds. Particularly horrifying was the fact that 2 other housemates remained alive. They were sleeping on the first floor and did not hear what was happening upstairs. The alarming call to 911 came only around noon the next day. One of the surviving roommates called the police, reporting an unconscious person. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they discovered a scene that shocked even experienced officers. Moscow Police Chief James Fry later described what he saw as the most horrific crime scene of his entire career. The lack of signs of forced entry initially disoriented investigators. There was no visible damage to the house that would indicate a violent entry, except for the back door. Nothing valuable was missing. This caused a wave of concern among local residents and university students. Was it a random attack, or did the killer have a specific target? The public reaction was immediate and massive. The University of Idaho strengthened security measures, many students left campus, and local residents began installing additional security systems in their homes. Fear and paranoia engulfed the quiet university town, as the killer remained at large and the motive for the crime was unclear. Behind every high-profile crime are real people with their own stories, dreams, and plans for the future. In the case of the tragedy in Moscow, Idaho, the victims were 4 young people, full of life and ambition. Their names, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, became known throughout the country, but not for the reasons they would have wanted. Madison Mogen, 21, was a senior studying marketing. Her friends and professors described her as an extremely sociable, cheerful young woman with a bright smile. Maddie grew up in Idaho and was a devoted sister and daughter. She dreamed of a career in marketing and was an active participant in student life. On that fatal night, Maddie, along with her best friend Kaylee, returned home around 1:45 a.m. after visiting a local bar. Kaylee Goncalves, also 21, was a senior studying general medicine. She planned to enter medical school after graduating from university. Friends remembered her as a persistent, purposeful, and compassionate person. Kaylee was from Arizona and moved to Idaho for her education. She was a diligent student and simultaneously worked as a waitress at a local restaurant, where she was valued as a responsible employee. Xana Kernodle, 20, studied general biology and planned to become a doctor. She was known for her kindness and talent for learning. Xana grew up in Idaho, in the city of Avondale, and was an active member of the Pi Beta Phi sorority. She was in a romantic relationship with Ethan Chapin, and that night he stayed in her room on the 2nd floor of the house on King Road. Please subscribe to my channel, and I will bring you more videos featuring the most shocking true crime stories. Ethan Chapin, 20, was the only male among the victims. He studied recreation, sport, and tourism and was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity. Friends described him as a kind, cheerful guy who was always ready to help. Ethan had a talent for music and often played guitar for his friends. He did not live in the house on King Road, but that night he stayed overnight with his girlfriend Xana. One of the girls woke up around noon and, noticing something strange, called friends, thinking that one of the roommates had fainted. Later, She called the police, who discovered the horrible scene. The investigation of the murders in Moscow became one of the most complex criminal proceedings in the history of Idaho. From the very beginning, the case was shrouded in mysteries and accompanied by numerous challenges for law enforcement. The Moscow police, who usually investigated minor crimes in the college town, suddenly found themselves at the epicenter of a complex investigation of 4 brutal murders. Investigators immediately involved substantial resources in the process. The local Moscow Police Department joined forces with the Idaho State Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and other law enforcement agencies. Crime scene investigators, digital forensics experts, behavioral analysts, and other specialists worked at the scene of the tragedy. The team of investigators collected and analyzed a huge amount of evidence from the crime scene. The house at 1122 King Road was literally taken apart in search of traces, fingerprints, DNA samples, and other potential evidence. Over 100 items that could have evidentiary value were collected, including a knife with a sheath found near the body of one of the victims. Detectives conducted hundreds of interviews with friends of the victims, classmates, neighbors, and other potential witnesses. Surveillance camera footage from across the city was reviewed, phone records and social media data were analyzed. Special attention was paid to reconstructing the chronology of events that night. The breakthrough in the case came through DNA evidence and surveillance data. Investigators found a DNA sample on the knife sheath found in one of the victims' rooms that did not belong to any of the victims. This evidence became key in identifying the suspect. Another important element of the investigation was data about a white Hyundai Elantra that was spotted near the crime scene on the night of the murders. Police published a request for information about owners of such cars in the university area. This request proved to be extremely productive. In parallel, investigators analyzed data from cell towers and tracked phone movements in the crime area. This information, combined with data on the movement of the white Hyundai Elantra, helped to create a clear picture of events. Gradually, the circle of suspects narrowed. First, the police excluded the ex-boyfriends of 2 victims, as well as the 2 surviving roommates. Then, the investigators' attention focused on a student from the neighboring state of Washington, who lived in Pullman, 15 kilometers from Moscow. By mid-December 2022, investigators already had serious grounds to suspect Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old graduate student in criminology at Washington State University. Kohberger owned a white Hyundai Elantra, his phone was recorded near the crime scene, and preliminary DNA analysis indicated a possible connection. Investigators began covert surveillance of Kohberger, who at that time had gone to his parents in Pennsylvania for Christmas vacation. The FBI tracked him across several states, gathering additional evidence and waiting for the final results of the DNA comparison. Finally, on December 30, 2022, almost 7 weeks after the murders, Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The arrest was the culmination of a complex investigation that combined modern forensic methods, traditional police work, and cooperation between several law enforcement agencies. At the time of the murders, Bryan Kohberger was a 28-year-old graduate student studying criminal psychology and criminology at Washington State University in Pullman. He didn't just study crime, he specialized in understanding criminal behavior and crime investigation methods. His dissertation was focused on researching the decision-making processes of criminals. This created an eerie contrast: a person who academically studied the psychology of criminals became a suspect in a brutal murder. Kohberger was born and raised in Pennsylvania in a suburb of Philadelphia. His father worked in maintenance, and his mother was a counseling psychologist. According to memories of former classmates and neighbors, during school years, Bryan was quite a withdrawn child who often became the target of bullying due to being overweight. In his teenage years, he struggled with self-esteem issues and social anxiety. However, over time, Kohberger changed. He lost significant weight, began exercising, and started showing interest in law enforcement activities. In 2018, he received a bachelor's degree in psychology from DeSales University in Pennsylvania, and then a master's degree in criminal justice and criminology. His professors noted him as a diligent student with a sharp analytical mind. In early 2022, Kohberger moved to Pullman, Washington, to continue his graduate studies. He lived alone, had minimal communication with neighbors, and led a relatively isolated lifestyle. A few months before the murders, Kohberger updated his vehicle, purchasing a white Hyundai Elantra, a model that later became a key element in identifying the suspect. According to the investigation, this same car appeared repeatedly in the area of the victim's house on King Road in the week before the murders. Particularly disturbing is the fact that Kohberger, according to the investigation, followed some of the victims through social media. According to prosecutors, he drove past the house on King Road at least 12 times in the month before the attack. These facts point to the planned nature of the crime rather than a random attack. After the murders, Kohberger's behavior changed significantly. According to testimonies from his friends and colleagues, he became even more withdrawn and nervous. He changed his appearance by shaving his beard and head, and also thoroughly washed his car. At the end of the semester, in December 2022, he set off to his parents' home in Pennsylvania. During this trip, FBI agents covertly monitored him. Interestingly, Kohberger had some experience in law enforcement. He worked as an intern at a police department and as a security guard. According to his former boss, he showed excessive interest in the details of criminal cases and investigation methods. The investigation established that Kohberger had no direct connection to the victims. They were not his students, did not attend classes together, and there was no evidence of previous personal contacts. This left the question of motive for the murder open. Why did a person studying criminal psychology choose these 4 students specifically? What prompted him to this horrific act? According to the criminological profile compiled by FBI experts, the crime showed signs of both a spontaneous and a carefully planned attack. The killer displayed enough caution not to leave obvious evidence, but at the same time demonstrated cruelty and persistence characteristic of crimes committed on emotional grounds. After Kohberger's arrest, his lawyers declared his innocence and readiness to fight the charges. However, the psychological profile of the suspect and the collected evidence painted a sinister picture of a person who crossed the line between the theoretical study of crime and its practical implementation. The arrest of Bryan Kohberger on December 30, 2022, was the result of painstaking investigative work that combined cutting-edge technology, traditional investigation methods, and a certain amount of luck. The key moment in the investigation was the use of DNA evidence, which ultimately linked the suspect to the crime scene. During the search of the house on King Road, investigators discovered several important physical pieces of evidence. One of the most significant was a leather knife sheath found near Madison Mogen's body. This sheath had a distinctive pattern and the inscription, K-bar, a designation of a well-known tactical knife manufacturer. The actual murder weapon was not found at the scene, but forensic experts theorized that the murders were committed with a fixed-blade knife. On the button of this sheath, technicians managed to find a single DNA sample that did not belong to any of the victims. This trace became critically important in the subsequent investigation. Investigators turned to a relatively new method in forensics, genealogical DNA analysis, and were able to identify potential relatives of the person whose DNA was found at the crime scene, gradually narrowing the circle to a specific family. On December 7, 2022, the Moscow police published a request for information regarding a white 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra that was spotted near the crime scene on the night of the murders. This request proved to be extremely important. The campus police at Washington State University in Pullman reported that such a car was registered to Bryan Kohberger, a graduate student in the criminology program. With this information, investigators began to carefully study Kohberger. They analyzed surveillance camera footage that showed his car in the area of the victim's house at least 4 times in the early hours of November 13. Tracking data from Kohberger's mobile phone also showed that he turned off his phone during the murders and later turned it back on outside of Moscow. Further analysis of mobile phone data revealed a disturbing pattern. Kohberger repeatedly visited the area of the house on King Road in the week before the murders, often at night. Investigators also established that he searched for information about the victims on social media and possibly even stalked one of them online. By mid-December, investigators had sufficient grounds to suspect Kohberger, but for an arrest, they needed to definitively confirm the DNA match. When Kohberger went to his parents in Pennsylvania for Christmas vacation, 24-hour surveillance began. FBI agents monitored his every move, waiting for an opportunity to obtain a sample of his DNA. The operation to obtain DNA evidence was conducted with extreme caution. Agents collected trash from Kohberger's parents' house and found items among it that could contain his DNA. Laboratory analysis confirmed, the genetic material from these items matched the DNA found on the knife sheath at the crime scene. With this evidence in hand, early in the morning of December 30, 2022, an FBI tactical team raided Kohberger's parents' house in Allentown. The suspect was arrested without resistance. During the search of the house, investigators found additional evidence, including dark clothing and gloves that could have been used during the crime. Simultaneously with the arrest in Pennsylvania, investigators obtained a warrant to search Kohberger's apartment in Pullman. There they found several knives, computer equipment, and other evidence that was seized for further analysis. After the arrest, Kohberger was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary with criminal intent. During his first court hearing in Pennsylvania, he agreed to extradition to Idaho. On January 4, 2023, he was brought to the Lada County Jail in Moscow, where he remained in custody without the right to bail. During the first court hearing, Kohberger did not plead guilty or not guilty, which is standard procedure at this stage. The judge appointed him a public defender, as the suspect stated he did not have funds to hire a private attorney. In May 2023, the Lada County Prosecutor's Office officially announced its intention to seek the death penalty for Kohberger if convicted. Prosecutor Bill Thompson stated that the circumstances of the crime met the requirements for imposing the highest punishment according to Idaho state law. In November 2024, a special hearing on the death penalty was held, at which Kohberger's defense tried to challenge the constitutionality of this punishment in the state of Idaho. However, Judge John Judge rejected these arguments, confirming that the prosecution has the right to seek the death penalty. The main defense strategy became challenging the key evidence collected against Kohberger. The defense team particularly fiercely fought for the exclusion of DNA evidence obtained from the knife sheath found at the crime scene. On February 25, 2025, a decisive hearing on this issue took place. Kohberger's attorneys argued that law enforcement violated his constitutional rights by collecting a DNA sample without a proper warrant. However, the judge rejected this request, ruling that the DNA evidence is admissible in court. In his decision, Judge John Judge noted that the police acted in accordance with current laws and procedures when collecting and analyzing DNA samples. This decision was a serious blow to the defense, depriving them of the opportunity to exclude the strongest evidence against Kohberger. To prepare for the trial, the FBI created a detailed three-dimensional model of the house on King Road where the murders took place. This model, which specialists from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit worked on, reproduces every detail of the premises as of the night of the tragedy. Initially, Kohberger's trial was supposed to begin in October 2023, but since then the date has been repeatedly postponed. The defense regularly filed motions for additional time to prepare, citing the complexity of the case and the large volume of evidence. The final date for the start of the trial was set for April 22, 2025. According to the judge, further delays would no longer be considered unless exceptional circumstances arise. Throughout his time in custody, Kohberger has been held in a separate cell with an increased level of security. According to prison administration reports, he spends most of his time alone, reading legal materials and communicating with his attorneys. It is known that his parents and sister visit him, although such visits are infrequent due to the distance between Idaho and Pennsylvania, where the family lives. His connection to the outside world is limited, and all his actions are carefully monitored by guards. According to legal experts, Kohberger's trial may last from 2 to 4 months. The prosecution plans to call over 60 witnesses, including the victim's roommates, forensic experts, crime scene investigators, and detectives who investigated the case. The community of Moscow, Idaho, is still recovering from the tragedy. According to the city's mayor, the murders forever changed the sense of security in this small university town. Many University of Idaho students transferred to other educational institutions after the tragedy, and the enrollment of new students decreased by 15% in the year following the murders. However, over time, the situation began to stabilize. The trial of Bryan Kohberger, scheduled for April 2025, will be one of the most high-profile criminal trials in recent years in the United States. It will attract the attention of millions of people and will likely be broadcast live, as Judge John Judge has already given permission for this. For the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, this trial will possibly be the last step in their long and painful journey to justice. For almost 2.5 years, they have been waiting for this moment, when the person charged with murdering their children will stand trial. The final decision regarding Bryan Kohberger's fate, whether he will be found guilty and, if so, what punishment he will receive, is now in the hands of the justice system. But regardless of the verdict, the memory of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin will live forever in the hearts of those who knew and loved them. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you think about this case. If you enjoy deep dives into true crime, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, friends.